Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we have Pallavi Mahajan, who is a firebrand and an enterprising gender rights advocate. And Pallavi is the co-founder of the Azad Initiative, and she is a Chevening scholar who's going to study masters in gender and development at IDS, University of Sussex. Her list of accomplishments is long, and the platforms where she's engaged for gender rights is even longer. One of the notable achievements of Pallavi is that she is an invited fellow at the Royal Society of Arts, London. All right. What I'll do is I cannot possibly go into the details of all the accomplishments that she has. It'll take us another 15 minutes to even cover the basics. So I'll put her LinkedIn profile in the chat box, and you people, if you want to, can please take a look at it and certainly engage with her. And please do, connect with her because she's got some amazing stuff to tell us. In fact, I'll tell you personally, I've had two very brief interactions with her, but the learnings have been immense. And in fact, I'm looking forward to some great learnings through this webinar also. Thank you for coming and having this chat with us, Pallavi. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, and hello, everyone. As Mustafa has very wholesomely captured my professional journey up till now, and therefore I wouldn't delve deep into those areas, but I'm happy to answer any questions as and when they come. So specifically, when Mustafa reached out to me and he brainstormed this entire idea, it was so important for all of us to understand that why in a field like law, which sets the pedestal for the other industries and other sectors to follow suit, the talk of gender representation and gender advocacy is so important. And I think that would be the curative area of our entire webinar, just to understand that why do we need more gender advocates and how each one of us in our own domain as lawyers can augment the field of gender advocacy. So if moving forward, I would start with my own journey from corporate litigation to gender advocacy, which is the plug-in line of today's webinar also. So before we do that, let's take a poll. So the first poll question would be that what percentage of women lawyers do you think in India are in leadership roles in various domains of the legal industry in India? Just plug in whatever percentage you think women fall into as far as leadership roles are concerned.
Folks, I've launched a poll right now, and you can just put in your responses. And in fact, Pallavi has some interesting bunch of questions lined up for us. So through the course of the webinar, we're going to launch these polls to get your responses and make it a little more interactive. And Pallavi, if I may, just one more thing that I want to inform the attendees about. Yeah, you will have two options before you. One is the chat option and one is the Q&A option. If you have any questions that you want Pallavi to take up, you can use the Q&A option for that. And for any other questions that you have, any other discussions that you want to do, maybe have with the panelists or the rest of the attendees, you can use the chat box for it. Thank you. So Pallavi, we have the responses coming in, and I'll publish I'll end the poll in a bit. You can continue if you want to.
Yeah.
Thank
you. So, till all these data points actually come into being, and I can see a tough fight between 15% and 30%. So let's look at the bigger data, because what are lawyers if not holding on evidence? So we start the entire gender debate with evidence in our hand. So if you run a run through around the various law schools in the country, about 62% of scholars that graduate from various law schools in the country, 62% of them are women. But how many reach the leadership position is 15%. Similarly, the number of women who have reported that they have subjected themselves to workplace handicapped and left law in between the pioneer points of their position as lawyers are almost equal to 52%. So these kind of data completely proves that there is definitely a lack of gender representation in the legal industry. And while there might be some people who might debate it as, it is a point of meritocracy, we really can't talk about gender representation. It is all about how well you perform in a particular field, the bottom line and the truth of the matter is that until and unless women see role models, they will never be able to take up their careers, specifically in the legal field. When they don't see women as justices, women as law firm partners, women as public policy holders, they will never see themselves also charging that career for themselves. And therefore, gender representation is of equal importance. Now, coming to my particular journey, so I'll not go into deep into it. I graduated from law school in 2011, and post that for 5.5 years, I worked in corporate litigation. So, you know, like most of you, when we enter the field of law, we have these massive dreams of, you know, curating a new legal field for ourselves and changing the law from top to bottom and making an impact. But somewhere while we are on that journey, we get so tom-tossled around the fallacies of law, in paying our bills, in understanding that how to climb the ladder in law firms or in various other domains, that we forget what was the main motive as to when we joined law school. So in 2015, I was escalated to the senior associate position in my then law firm, and at the leadership position, which is the first leadership position in a law firm is that of a senior associate, I saw that definitely there was underrepresentation. And I was also at that time a part of an international federation of women lawyers. And once we were just discussing as to globally, why do we have such underrepresentation of women? And that is when we decided to lead a project called the Gender Diversity Project. I was leading this project from India, and there were about 13, 14 lawyers from across the globe who were leading this project in their particular democracies. And we read about 100 law firm policies from across the globe on diversity and inclusion. I particularly took up a certificate course on gender and sexuality from University of Pittsburgh. And we ran qualitative and quantitative research across our demographies to understand what is the blueprint that we can submit to the various law firms to increase diversity. So after 6 months of really strenuous research work, we were able to submit about a 34-pointer blueprint to our concerned law firms. And in 2 years of following this 34-pointer law blueprint, out of which only 85% of the recommendations were implemented by various firms in India, we saw a 24% increase in leadership position occupied by women in various law firms. And we also saw an 8% increase in the well-being index. And honestly, if I talk about, you know, today from hindsight, I look at it, I think this gender diversity project was my catalyst for my movement towards gender advocacy. And I'm not going to sugarcoat the story by saying that it was met by a lot of nods. From family to friends to mentors to colleagues, I think everybody thought that I was on some fantasy land. I was tripping over something that I just imagined in my vivid dreams. And why was I nullifying my career as a corporate litigation lawyer and taking up something which is unheard of, right? Gender advocacy is a field that somebody takes up as a pro bono subject or just to add goodwill points to their profile. Nobody takes it up as a well-paying part of being a lawyer. But that is what I've understood after 3 years of shifting my trajectory towards gender advocacy, that you don't have to follow the herd mentality. You really have to understand what is that part of law that you can wake up to at 3 o'clock in the morning and would want to do. And for me, it was gender advocacy. So in 2017, I made the big move, and finally, in all free move to gender advocacy, I co-founded my feminist intersectional feminist NGO called the Azad Initiative, by the virtue of which we work on academic, on research, on policy, and on activism projects related to gender. And I think how in the last 1 year, the entire tables turned for me was when I was selected as a 2019 Gender and Sexuality Fellow for United Nations. And then I got to work with the LGBTQI community, with nationalities from across the globe, how policies are framed in tandem with United Nations Women or UNDP. And when people, I mean, as Mustafa mentioned, he very kindly has plugged in my LinkedIn profile also. And what everybody gets overwhelmed is with these big names like Royal Society of Arts London, Global Goodwill Ambassador. So all these look great on a profile. But what has been my biggest learning of moving towards something that I personally like in law is the 2 years of struggle of really owning my own self without giving into the herd mentality. And that has been my biggest learning of movement towards corporate litigation to gender advocacy, and believing that once you take up anything in law with consistency and persistence, you will get a lot of support from unforeseen virtues where things will just accumulate in your area. But what is required is to have that spirit of just going forward and doing what you like in the vast domain of law, and not to follow a herd mentality. Over to you, Mustafa.
Yeah, Pallavi, thank you so much for this. And we're glad for you that you've shared so many interesting data points also with us through the course of this. We have a lot of students attending this specific session. And this is something that we had also, discussed briefly before, that how would we want students specifically to educate themselves better in this space? That is something that you and I were discussing the other day, that what can we do? Should we start at where we are? Should we understand what are the perceptions around the movement for everybody who wants to first clear out and dispel the misunderstanding that is there around feminism, and maybe advocate for gender studies and feminist jurisprudence being taught in all law schools? What would your views be on that, Pallavi?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And that is actually a very important question as to where do we start from. So Mustafa has just briefed me, and I've also studied about it a little bit, that there are a few national law universities like NUJS and LSIU who are running these diversity census programs, and by the virtue of which you can take up these data points and see where diversity lies in your own law schools, in your own schools, as a matter of fact, if there are people from the other domains that have joined in. Because it is very important and pertinent to understand that where we can do this big talk around gender, but to really get the active position on ground, that is there diversity in a particular school? If there is diversity, are we accepting the diversity? Are we letting our students from gender queer spectrum to accept their diversity and to practice their sexuality in a way that they are comfortable with? So A, we can start with that. B, because in various law schools, you might not have a very well profound elective as gender studies, because this subject happens to be a postgrad study. It happens to be a specialization subject. There are various other subjects with various other courses available. Loctopus would be running a course very, very soon on gender. They are delving a course as to understand that how gender is supposed to be an interdisciplinary field, and it can be submerged into various other interest areas for law students. Similarly, reading about is very important. As lawyers, I think we are anyway augmented with our learning curve to be at a high rise, because law is a very dynamic field. You never stop learning in law when you become a lawyer. So reading about policy papers, understanding what United Nations is doing about advocacy, understanding what is the position of India as far as gender laws are concerned, not reading judgments just because they happen to be a fodder for your moot courts or fodder for conference papers, but to understand when we read judgments, where are the fallacies? Where could maybe a different perspective of a particular judgment lie? So thinking from a broader perspective is extremely important, specifically for a novice field like gender. And this is a very good time to be in gender, because the ground is uneven and the ground is open for any kind of deliberation. So how badly do you want to augment that field is extremely important, and how badly do you want to nurture? There are resources available, and it's just that how well you want to get your knowledge in this particular field.
Thank you for that response, Pallavi. And that's something that, every young individual today or a student comes across, a question and a decision that they have to make, which is a choice between, I can read up about all these things to know what to say to sound woke. But how do I actually become woke? How do I understand what feminism means? That is something nobody wants to, explore. People just want to know, okay, what is the politically correct thing to say? but no one wants to delve into the question of, okay, why are we saying that this is politically correct or incorrect? So I think a very foundational understanding of these concepts then becomes necessary, right?
Absolutely.
And if you can maybe highlight a few some works that is being taken up, anything that is being done in this space to sort of bridge this gap, anything in your experience that you have may have come across?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of organizations that are particularly working on plugging gender in public policy, in law, in corporate economy, etc. But before we delve into it, specifically because, Mustafa, you mentioned that how it is important to first understand where do I stand in my own small being of being a gender advocate. I mean, your profile on LinkedIn doesn't have to read a gender advocate. You could practice gender advocacy in your own domain. And for that, it is very important that I thought that there are 5 principles that each one of us in our own lives could establish as gender lawyers. And the first thing is, please ask for pronouns. There is nothing wrong in it. Please ask for pronouns. And whenever you're meeting somebody, ask for the pronouns that they want to be associated with. He, she, it, he, she, them, they, her, his, they, and start using it. And if you falter, please accept it as a mistake and don't just brush it away ki kya farak padta hai. It is somebody's identity. And start using the correct gender inclusive language. This I also learned, and as an ally, I believe that it is very important to get onto the field and to believe that jab you will become like a perfect gender activist, only then you will get into the field, is to understand that gender inclusive language is an ongoing process. So it's not a transgender, it is a transgender person. It is not gay, it is a gay person. Transgender, gay, lesbian, heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, asexual are identities. They are adjectives, they are not nouns. So understand that they have to be associated with person. Similarly, how very plainly we use the word, like, like generically we call himself, or he was doing it, or replace it with they. Because these could be trigger points for somebody else, and respect and empathy are the cornerstones of gender advocacy. The third is that, as Mustafa mentioned, it is extremely important to understand gender. Please read. As lawyers, we stand at a pedestal where people sanction what we are saying. So just loose statements are not just going to be derogatory for your own self, but also derogatory for the profession. Because a loose comment made on Instagram just for the heck of it might just put down the entire work of 3 decades that feminist movements across the globe have done. So read and back each statement up with a lot of research. And the last is that please be allies. You don't have to be from somebody from the spectrum to believe that, it is their life. Gender, any which way, from any gender minority or majority group will really will inspire us or affect us. So it is important to be a part of the ally movement. And if we are not know about things, to learn about it. Now, coming to that, what are the movements that are being running across the globe? There are various international organizations. United Nations is a broad spectrum, but even small level organizations like Plan International, like Fawcett Society in India, National Commission for Women, various other NGOs, NAS Foundation, there is various LGBTQI communities also, where they have a lot of knowledge management resources available, by the virtue of which one can learn about the journey of gender. There are also various queer communities which are running their own policy programs. There is YP Foundation. There are various other organizations where even if you do not want to intern there, you can always pick up their resources and start learning about them. Law Octopus keeps writing a lot on their blog about gender. And it is not just reading about it, it's maybe reading about it, researching about it more, and maybe plugging in a comment. So how proactively you want to participate in gender advocacy just sets the ball rolling.
Some amazing information there for my own, future reference. And in fact, what I'll do is, in the follow-up email that we send to all our attendees, we'll try and plug in the resources that we have mentioned, some foundational reading that they can maybe do on this topic, which will help and do us all good. And I would want to say that these are some amazing insights, but I am hesitant on using the word insights because this is something that everybody should ideally be knowing and not something that should be brought out later. But I'm glad that for the attendees' sake, at least, it's out there and everybody does become conscious and start using these terms better and more responsibly. Thank you so much for that, Pallavi. Now, the next question that I want to come to is about your journey in gender advocacy. You've briefly touched upon the transition that you made from corporate litigation to gender advocacy, but can you also tell us what, certainly you were always passionate about this, how did you go about that journey? How was that transition? How did you plan about making that shift, and what made you finally decide that, okay, instead, if I want to pursue this, if I this is my passion, let me transition right now? What was the point that triggered this?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mustafa. So before that, I'll just use an analogy which works for me, might not work for the others, but it works for me. That if one has to swim, one has to just jump into the pool, and that doesn't mean that you be a retard and not know the science of floating, or to understand how deep the pool is, or to maybe have the right gear. But you don't really have to know the perfect route of specifically taking up something which does not have a precedent to follow. So in my case, as I mentioned, that after taking up the gender diversity project, and then 2017 finally making that big transition, there are certain things that I did in my life which I think that are not specific to only my field, but are specific to anybody which might be specific to anybody who wants to make that big move to understand that where this entire debate of passion and career lies. So the first thing is, as we were discussing before, not to follow the herd mentality. Now, law is a beautiful career field which is extremely vast and diverse. And to understand where I fit in the big picture is extremely important. And for that, do not follow the herd mentality. Just because the tier 1 law firms pay X amount of money, you don't have to follow it just because there's money involved, or there is wealth involved, or there is goodwill involved. Understand what is my understanding of the entire legal field as such. Second is introspection. So while we are on this journey of law, specifically after 5 years or 3 years of law school, throughout the journey, we might have realized that these are the things that I really like in law, be it be policy, be it be business development, getting clients to a particular firm, or be it be drafting, be it be activism, be it be argumenting, or be it be drafting of briefs, etc. So introspection in the broad field of law, specifically when our 5 years and 3 years of law are generalist degree, is extremely important. And that is a journey that each one of us would have to take. In my case, gender and specifically advocacy part of gender intermingled with public policy was something that I wanted to do. I wasn't really enjoying my time at the corporate litigation drafting briefs. It wasn't something that I would resonate with for next 40 years of my life. And the third thing is to reach out. I reached out shamelessly to n number of people possible to mentor me. I'm not saying that everybody welcomed me with open arms, but naysayers are always the catalyst in our journey. So LinkedIn became my new Instagram. Like, I would reach out to everybody possible. And therefore, I also believe that somehow, I don't know why, but students specifically who are in school do not understand or do not realize the importance of LinkedIn. But please reach out, and most of the times you will get a lot of help from the resources. So seek inspiration in the lives of others, and always understand that how from their life you can smaller down your own struggle journey. The fourth, which is very important, is to win wherever you are, because what is required specifically when you take up these non-stereotypical career fields is consistency, hard work, and persistence. There is no shortcut to it, and this is not a moral science lesson. These are not something that we read back in school, but there is absolutely no shortcut to consistency and persistence. Just be at it. Make sure there is no stone unturned. As you know, Mustafa mentioned that there are resources available at Law Octopus, etc. And if you are interested in gender advocacy, you should know these law resources like the back of your hand. You must not just memorize them, but know each and every nitty-gritty of it, because there is really no substitute to working really hard when you want to take up a non-stereotypical subject. And the last is, please do not be afraid to fail, because you know how we read about all these autobiographies be it Michelle Obama's life or Oprah Winfrey's life, sorry, just quoting feminist women across the globe, but this is where my interest area lies. But when you look at their lives and you see, oh wow, even their most struggled part just so beautifully fits in the big picture. The truth of the matter is, not many will tell you, but let's share the secrets here, that everything fits in. A wrong elective taken, a bad supervisor at the dissertation, a very, very bitchy boss at a firm, everything fits in the big picture. But what is important is, please do not be afraid to fail, or do not accept defeat at the roll call. So just go after whatever you are doing and make sure that from your side, the causes are absolutely optimum, of leaving no stone unturned.
Thank you again, Pallavi. Very inspiring, in fact. And in fact, I'm going to take like some huge inspiration from that for my own journey ahead. Pallavi, there are a lot of questions that are coming up from students and all the other attendees also. This is just for the attendees. We'll be taking the questions a little after having covered a few other themes that Pallavi would first speak on. And thank you for all the interesting questions. We've been going through some. Vaibhav, you've posted a very interesting question. So have you, Sonia. Thank you. We'll do come to the questions in a bit. But before that, Pallavi, can we also speak about leadership in the legal space and leadership of by different genders, and what are the challenges that you see right now and how to overcome them?
So yes, I mean, in the specifically here, I will talk about women leaders and what are the challenges they face in the industry. The first challenge not the first challenge, but out of the many challenges that women face in the industry is lack of role models. So, as you were discussing the data about how there are just 15% of women in the leadership roles, in the judiciary, it's even worse. Right now in the Supreme Court, out of a 34 sitting bench, there are just 3 women who are lawyers. That is not even close to 8%. And when women do not see role models, they're not able to see themselves in a field where, I'm very sorry to say, but law is male. It is an extremely male-dominated field, which is not just male-dominated, it is patriarchal, because women are relegated to certain so-called brownie matters. And the moment a woman decides to maybe go get married or have a progeny of her own, suddenly you will find depletion of matters that are given. So balancing that entire call between ambition and your personal life becomes a little more elaborate when it comes to leadership positions. The second is, which most of the women are very deep conditioned to believe, is the imposter syndrome. Unfortunately, it is because of the society where we women believe that at the moment we reach a leadership position, we start double guessing ourselves, that am I being too authoritative, or is my leadership becoming a challenge for my male colleagues to call me out, or how am I supposed to not being seen? So suddenly you will find, women leaders, when they start climbing up the ladder, dressing up a little more subtly, or, dressing up in sari. So there is nothing wrong with saris. Everybody should wear a sari, but they will change their entire disposition just to suit the male narrative. And that is a very strong imposter syndrome that women go through, that I don't deserve this. And they start challenging that in their head. The third is that women believe that they are superheroes. And specifically at the leadership position in law firms, they're the guilt of being a partner because they are not able to allocate time, or the guilt of being a caretaker, a guardian to a child or a household is very rampant in women leaders, specifically in the legal field, where working hours are a little more elaborate than the other fields. In that aspect, women have to realize that delegation of work is extremely important, even if what is at that particular time the needs that they have the most towards their own selves. If it is their career and ambition, there is nothing wrong in it. And the fourth and the most important is the female antagonism aspect. So I have really researched on it, and where a lot of people also have this stereotype about women that boys can be very good friends, women cannot be good friends, and women only tend to be bitchy towards each other. The history behind it is that due to decades of patriarchy, women were forced to believe कि इतनी ही position है, इतना ही percentage आपको leadership का मिलेगा. So there is only one person who can occupy. So just, coldly null off the other competitors. But what we really have to understand that we today cannot stand as women leaders without the ally support. It is extremely important to be the mentor and sponsor to a young girl when you reach a partner position or a leadership position in a firm, to become a sponsor to somebody, a young 21, 22-year-old girl that comes and joins a firm. Because it is extremely important to pay it forward. And we have to, as women leaders, as women lawyers, nullify that female antagonism concept, because there is an equal space for all of us under the sun. It is just that patriarchy has played with our head.
Thank you, Pallavi. And moving forward, so those are some great insights again. Now I wanted to bring in the contemporary angle here, and understand the impact of COVID-19 on gender advocacy A, and also see it in light of all these other resistance to the movement of feminism that are coming about. There's meninism that's come about. There's I am not a feminist movement that is going around. What are your views on that? And certainly I don't see it, we should not become definitely adversarial towards the same, but how to better uh, factor in what they are saying and engage them in a more uh, honorable way. How would you propose that we do it?
Thank you, Mustafa. So before we start with the question, there's also a poll, because let's understand where our audience sees the post-COVID-19 effect on gender advocacy, on gender equality movement per se. But can we plug in that poll, please, Mustafa?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so here is the poll. Would love to hear from the attendees, how do they feel that will COVID-19 affect gender equality movement? And while the poll is, wow, the poll is moving like really fast. Thank you so much. But while the poll takes its own sweet time to collaborate results, let's understand how are these times different. So before, as Mustafa mentioned, that no matter how many pandemics, how many world scenarios that have hit because of gender, because of various other reasons, and has gender equality movement suffered? Yes, it has. But how is this pandemic different? So let's understand what happens in the other pandemic situation, the other global, other world, the synopsis of the world that goes through various other glitches that go through. So in prior glitches, what really happens is that the recovery from these glitches is a little different from the glitches that happen in post COVID-19 situation. In the post COVID-19 glitches, the public expenditure in the recovery phase is in the domains, in the sectors where there is dominance of male, say construction, manufacturing sectors. Similarly, women are specifically taken as a trade-off. They are considered as a burden to the economy, as a burden to decision making, and therefore they are relegated to very small positions in a recovery phase. And that is when gender equality suffers a lot. And the third and the most important is that over the last decade, the women across the globe, the gender spectrum across the globe has gained a voice, because in most of the demographies, including India, the legal status has been sanctioned to the gender spectrum. And therefore, this time versus any other glitch that has happened in the world, the economy is very different. So great. Most of you think that 72% of us think that it is going to affect the gender equality movement negatively. Well, there is a little bit of change in that aspect. So as we were discussing, that post-COVID-19 means that there are two things that have functioned. The public expenditure is going to be in the recovery phase in the areas, in the sectors where there is a dominance of women: healthcare, nursing, education, because these are the sectors which have taken the brunt. And these are the sectors which have been recognized by the world economy around that require the most collaboration. And these are the sectors where women are in multitudes or in dominance. The second aspect is the importance of care economy has come to the forum. So you know how unpaid labor at home or the work done by women at home was not accounted for? Now it has come to the forum, is because men have spent a lot of time in isolation, and they've realized that women don't leisure around at home. There is work done. And now that has come to the eyes of the patriarchy, I'm not going to put men per se, but to the patriarchy as such. So care economy is coming to the forums, and legislators and public policy makers across the globe are realizing that there has to be infrastructure support plus services support that has to be given to the care economy, say crash facility or safe spaces or better movement of women. So this time it is going to be very different. This time, rather, gender equality movement, if taken in the correct stride, is going to grow exponentially. And the most important thing that we have seen during COVID and in now in certain countries in the recovery phase is the ally movement. Most of the bureaucrats, public policy, most of the people from the other domains have come across and been in one vision that the 3 decades of work that feminists from across the globe have done cannot be relegated to a small square. We cannot go back to the 1960s because we are then negating the power of 49% of the population of the world. So believing that COVID-19 is actually going to exponentially enhance the gender equality movement, the work has to be done in that spree. So in our particular areas also, it is extremely important, specifically for women leaders, to take cognizance of this movement and to start expanding our skill set. Before this webinar, Mustafa and I were just having a brief chat and we were just discussing how important it is to augment our knowledge specifically in the post-COVID time, because there will be 3 positions and 1 person available because of lack of liquidity of cash movements. Therefore, women, whatever their handicaps were, say IT, say information technology, say various other technology bits, say even logistics management, they have to start augmenting their skills so that gender equality movement doesn't suffer. And there is equal amount of work being done by various economies to make sure that we are at least on page with gender equality. You will be very pleased to know that in 2017, Sweden launched its first feminist trade policy, international trade policy, which was expected of Sweden because it is an out-and-out feminist country. They state in their constitution that it's a feminist country. But what came as a very worthy surprise was an emerging economy like Mexico, which came up with its feminist international trade policy during the COVID times. So all this movement just shows that we are not relegating back to 1960s. What is really required to enhance this work is support of the allies and all of us to come together to make sure that SDG 5, Gender Equality Sustainable Development Goal 5, which we want to accomplish by 2030 under the Sustainable Development Goal, doesn't become null and void.
Thank you, Pallavi. And then coming towards the last segment of this before we take up the Q&A, what advice would you give the attendees here, who most of us consist of are from the legal fraternity? How do we be more woke in our profession, generally be more woke? I know you've covered a lot of advice in the course of your responses. So how do we in our profession be more woke? And I'd like to just tie in one of the questions of an attendee, Eva Singh. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, where she has expressed a very genuine concern that in a professional setup, when we are actually defending someone and telling someone that they are being sexist or discriminatory, how do we do that better so that we don't be seen as being argumentative? And that's certainly a challenge that I have faced myself. So if you have any advice around that.
So I'll get to the first question first, and then I'll come to the question that was asked by the attendee. So as far as skills are concerned, to really up your game as gender advocates, or as a matter of fact, lawyers per se, who are ready, who want to make an impact in the bigger understanding of things and don't just look at impact as a pro bono activity, we have a poll which has certain skills mentioned. So maybe Mustafa can plug in that poll and maybe we can look at it and you can use that poll to understand that how are the skills for becoming a global leader in the lawyer domain works. So there are 4 skills: leadership, networking, career planning, and constant upscaling. So just mark it as you think is the most important skill for you. Great. So while this works, I can maybe get back to the question by the attendees. So what is important is to understand that the correct usage of words. Over the years, I have understood that gender equality movement requires a disclaimer or benefit of doubt. It has to be a restoration of justice rather than becoming a radical movement. And it has to be in consensus with that, how am I making a change to make the other person understand who might be trapped in deep conditioning of gender bias. So using the correct language is extremely important. A. B, understanding your rights even at workplace. Prevention of sexual harassment at workplace is a legislation which, according to me, is one of the most progressive legislations that India has ever made. Please read that legislation and understand that where do your rights lie. There is always an IC at various law firms. If it is not there, then there are various other cells available. If things reach out of your own caretake area, otherwise, please reach out to your seniors that these are the sexist remarks that are made, and I want to put them under the right notion. So I'm not saying that every work done in these areas will be met with open arms. There might be certain times that it is not even addressed, or these are just brushed away as lame suggestions being put to the management of a particular firm. But what is required is to keep at it and to get ally support through your own disposition. When you start practicing gender advocacy, one person will change, and that one person will have trickle down effect in the form of the other people. But please use your voice. The moment we think that our voice is of no value is the moment we are becoming supporters or perpetrators to gender bias. So please use your voice and take ally support. Otherwise, there is outside the firm, in the form of the IC, various resources group available to make sure that if you are pushed against the wall, then things can be handled from there. Now coming to the poll, great. So leadership is taken as number one, then networking, then constant upscaling and career planning. So all of these four are equally important, where I particularly think that leadership and networking are something that each one of us has to augment our fields. So for the audience, I thought that we would divide leadership under three areas, because leadership looks like a big Wikipedia word that everybody wants to read on Google. But a leadership point for a lawyer is divided between, according to me, as an initiator, as a facilitator, and as an upholder. So when you see a problem, be it in your own firm or in a brief or in a policy that you are drafting, how am I initiating to solve that problem? So, I was taught by my first boss, by my first mentor when I joined the profession, that never come to me with a problem. Come to me with a problem, but also come with a solution. So that solution might sound imbecile to you, but come to me with a solution. So be an initiator of problem solving. The second is facilitator. The moment you climb the ladder of being a leader in a legal field, please pay it forward. It is extremely important to facilitate the path for somebody else and not just hold the entire learnings to our own self. And the third is of becoming an upholder. Value system in law is extremely important. You remember in the last year or the fourth year, we have these professional skills elective that we take up in law school. Most of us score really well in it because it is quite an easy subject, but the learning of it has to really stay. Go to a honesty, punctuality, or being very cautious as to what you are saying, because people will hold you to the nose just because you're a lawyer, of any comment, any statement made which is not subjected to due research or subjected to due commitment. So become an initiator and a facilitator and a upholder. These are for leadership. Now coming to networking. Networking has to become the bread earning source for a lawyer. And it is not just about how many matters you get to the firm or how many times you are able to get clients to the firm. It is about networking in your own fraternity, which is beyond the geography. And for any networking group to be really potent, it is important that it is a symbiotic relationship, that everybody in the network is benefited from it. Second, it has to be a going concern. As we discussed in leadership, networking cannot only be limited to just me and my best friends. It has to be a going concern. And the third is that the goal of that network has to be established. So whenever you are networking, make sure that even on that LinkedIn, then 3-4 lines that you send to somebody you are networking are personal. Maybe read their LinkedIn profile, understand maybe they have written an article that you resonate with. Quote one line from that article, but show that you are a lawyer. You are not just anybody else sending a LinkedIn request. It has to be backed by the correct aspects of networking. Now coming to career planning, as we had discussed earlier also, because 5 years or 3 years of law is a very generalist degree, one doesn't really understand how we are supposed to plan our career. But to keep working on it is extremely important. What are my 5-year goals? What are my 10-year goals? One can redo it as per exposure, as per better understanding, as per better networking opportunities. But to have a broader framework of career is extremely important. Just because we graduated, some of us graduated from national law schools or got into the tier 1 law firm, that is not the end of the career. It's not going to sustain us. As they say that glamour is always looking for fresh spaces. So a new batch of associates come to the law firm and you're redundant. So it is important to keep planning your career. Where do I fit in the broad aspect of law? What is that I want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and still ready to do? And the last is constant upskilling. It is very important to scale up our learning curve. And as lawyers, we are blessed that it is a part of our career field. But to understand the interdisciplinary nature of law, gender and analytics, gender and technology, law and maybe leadership, understand how advisory works, understand how various sectors work, understand how in post-COVID areas, work and law will change, how we are supposed to use Zoom and use the correct equipment to make sure that we look reasonably well on digital media. So I think these are the particular 4 areas where each one of us can work on.
Thank you for such an insightful response, Pallavi. I'm sure the attendees have benefited immensely from those responses. Now, we may really want to move on to a lot of questions that have been posted. And I'm not sure if we'll be able to cover all. We'll try to cover all the questions, but there are some really interesting ones. And let us start with a few of them. I'll have to be a little more careful. I'll have to start using they and have to be. So Ashwini has asked a question. They have asked that while talking about gender, only women are considered as a suppressed gender in the general context. And this leaves out a lot of other communities, the LGBTQ plus community especially. So how do we make sure that when we are having this conversation about gender with others, we incorporate and get the point across that it's not just the female community that we are referring to, but rather the rest of the LGBTQ plus as well?
So thank you for the question, Ashwini. So Ashwini, that's actually a question pre 377. So after Navtej Singh Johar, before that, the community wasn't recognized. So as lawyers, we couldn't really come out and talk about it. Like, as a matter of fact, I mean, once when I was in the law firm and I wanted to go for a pride parade, my boss said that, but that's illegal. How can you as a lawyer go and join the pride parade? And even if psychologically I wanted to go, in my head was, as a lawyer, of course, I cannot really, sabotage the entire legal framework. So post 377, post 6 September 2018, sorry for my language, post 6 September 2018, after 377 was decriminalized, a lot of now changes are taking place, specifically in the diversity and inclusion spectrum in law firms in India and even in advisory firms. So because McKinsey does a lot of knowledge management for the law firms in India, you would find their report. You might find that report on their website, where they have been working very proactively with law firms to include LGBTQI community to join the forum. And once you start in your own small way, start talking about gender and violation of gender or gender minority in the sector, it is specifically important to use the word gender and not just use women. So once we start resonating like that, the things are going to change. And even when you're having a discussion with somebody, use the word gender and understand that even though decriminalization of 377 has happened, the second phase is inclusion of civil rights. So while women have civil rights, we can get cis-het women can get married, we can have a child, we can adopt, we can have a property in our name, joint bank accounts, spousal rights, etc. They can't. So it is specifically important for LGBTQIA, which are even a more gender minority than women, to give them a special place when we are talking about it. We can talk about pink dollar economy, that how India every year loses 1.8% of its GDP just because of homophobia. So segregate women and LGBTQIA under the broad spectrum of gender and akin your understanding, akin your statements to the needs of both the spectrums. So they are very different spectrums. Women still are at a privilege as compared to LGBTQIA, but separate your statements for both of them. And I think in that way, you'll be able to resonate with the gender spectrum as a whole.
Thank you, Pallavi. The next question that we have here is, and this is something which everybody tells you to be brave about, but in reality, it is not as easy for somebody to be. So this relates to the question where an anonymous attendee has asked this, that realistically, the potential dangers of being vocal about sexism, especially in the professional setting. No matter what we say that, okay, there are so many policies at our workplace, it has strong implications on your career advancement. And there are still a lot of prejudices, and a lot of people view it as that, okay, this person is maybe too sensitive. So what are your views on that, and how do we cut around those challenges?
I absolutely agree with you. And I am myself extremely pragmatic with my approach toward gender advocacy. I have never regarded it as a movement to, how they regard feminists as these angry, bra burning individuals from across the globe. I am extremely pragmatic about the field. And that is why it is extremely important for representation of more allies at the leadership role. Because when you know that you have support, you can voice out your opinions. And I understand for somebody who's just stepping into a career, there are a lot of things at stake, and you're always double guessing and calculating as to whether this really suits the battle or not. So for that, it is important to understand that you might want to lose certain battles, but you don't want to lose the war. So initially, when you are at a joining position, when you are at a vulnerable position at a firm and you want to lower down your volume, there is nothing wrong in it. Nobody is holding you to the nose. Even as far as coming out is concerned, please, it is not an obligation for you to come out just because to prove it a point. Similarly, it is not an obligation for you to come out and prove a sexist remark. Whenever you are comfortable, you can do that. And that is why specifically when you reach the leadership position, it becomes important that you do it, because at that time you have the authority and you have the power. So feminist movement is always about making sure that power dynamics is channelized in a very equalist proportion. So even if you don't want to do it right now, it's okay. Understand that between the war and the battle, your focus is on the war. That when you reach the leadership position, you're not going to make it tough for your juniors who joined the profession. So once you ace your craft, become like an ace lawyer, really augment your knowledge and start climbing the ladder, and then you voice out your concerns, it's going to prove the point. So we have so many lawyers, who after Menaka Guruswamy, as a matter of fact, how she and Kaju came out is after they to the general public at large is when they accomplished that position, when they could command people and tell them that, listen, we are legitimate. So in your case also, if you're not comfortable, please don't hold yourself accountable or become too hard on yourself. Reach a leadership position, get ally support, and then start talking about it. Otherwise, even at associate level, if you want, and you are not getting a lot of support from the organization where you're working at, there is a lot of resource groups available outside your firm which can support you. So it's absolutely your calling. How do you want to take it forward?
Thank you again, Pallavi. So now I would also like to come to take questions around the question of how to take or make a career in gender advocacy. And there are some very specific questions in that regard. And I think one of the purposes that we discussed initially about the reason why we should also have this webinar is to inspire more individuals to take up gender advocacy, because every individual who adds on to this movement and starts working as a gender rights advocate is a great win for the movement. So to take questions from that discipline, an anonymous attendee has asked that what would you suggest to start off? Do you, in this space of gender advocacy, do you start off as a practicing lawyer, or do you start off as a researcher with a policy place? Because to that individual, a lot of other people had advised that practical exposure is necessary, which you'll probably get as a practicing lawyer. What are your views on that, and what And I understand that everybody will have their own roadmap depending on their interests. What is your experience been?
So both of them in tandem together. Practical knowledge is extremely important, but I would not disassociate the importance of literature review, of understanding the journey of gender rights across the globe. India is still extremely virgin as far as gender laws is concerned, but taking inspiration from the other demographies which have become gender which have climbed a particular pedestal of gender rights is important. So even if you want to work with various NGOs, foundations, international organizations immediately after law school, great. But that doesn't mean that you do not work on your own self to enhance your knowledge. So they have to work together. Second is that I would definitely advocate, maybe later in life or however you think works for you, a master's program specifically in gender. So various universities run a lot of master's courses in gender in tandem with the other disciplines, is gender and media, gender and law, gender and development, gender and globalization. So maybe you could look up at those courses. And you can also look up at fellowships. So there are various, the United Nations, Plan International, SAARC countries have their own fellowship. There is something called Vedu Change Makers who have various fellowship. I'm sure Law Octopus also has they definitely have this plugin where they have fellowships and internships. Please keep a lookout for them, where you could enhance your knowledge about gender laws and gender advocacy. In turn, in organizations which help you understand the groundwork of gender, the policy work of gender, and the law work of gender. So gender works in three broad categories: academic, policy, and law and activism. It is important that all three fields are augmented. So a lot of things can function together, but yes, practical knowledge is extremely important. So maybe working with one of the learning development cells, working with an NGO, working with a policy wing of an international organization would really help you advance your case.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. And I think we can take a few more questions given the paucity of time. One question which I think will highlight a lot of other points over here would be, can you tell us about your motivations to start your NGO, the Azad Initiative? What led to that? And what were the challenges maybe that you faced in the course of it? And after having finally launched your NGO and the work that you have done, what I'm sure it brings a great sense of satisfaction. And what other works is your NGO going to take up in the near future?
So the motivation to start Azad was definitely the Gender Diversity Project. This is, I obviously, even in law school, I resonated very well with gender. I understood my own position, and if I was being a marginalized community in the broad area of the legal industry. So for me, it was extremely important to start working on an initiative that looks at economic independence and social inclusion of genders, and not just gender-based violence or the other fields which are equally important. But I thought that economic and financial autonomy and inclusion are something that need to be worked on, and that was my motivation for starting Azad. And then, as I said, once you leave no stone unturned in your own field, forces will come and join your way. I don't know how it functions, might sound extremely spiritual, but you get a lot of support from the universe once you really leave no stone unturned from your side. So be it collaboration with United Nations, be it collaboration with RSA, with the other fields, it just happened because I think somewhere I was the fortunate one to find out my mission in life. Now, one of my biggest learning from Azad was not to become like an Enthu cutlet specifically in a field like gender. So I was running this project with National Skill Development Corporation in Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the most patriarchal states in the country. And we wanted to include more women workforce in areas which has male dominance. So, I really polished myself in the vernacular, understood how to communicate with the village sarpanch and the panchayats, etc., to inspire them to send their women to start working in male-dominated fields. While I did all the work, after my first or second meeting, I started realizing that other than forget about getting a lot of appreciation, I started receiving a lot of backlash from the community. Like I was labeled as a black sheep among them who is not supposed to enter the community. And I went back and started resonating and understanding that in sensitive fields like gender, the aim should not be to change the entire village. The India Gender Equality Index is not going to change in 1 year, and definitely not with just your contribution. Always aim to change that micro field. That micro field will have a trickle down effect, and it will start it will start making that macro effect. So don't change the entire village, and always take cognizance of the geography that you are in, believing that, oh, why, how can Sweden or Nepal, as a matter of fact, Nepal is a extremely progressive country, even with its small size. Oh, Nepal में ये function होता है, India में क्यों नहीं function हो सकता? It's because the geography is different. We are a country that works on ideologies, religions, culture. We are a melting pot. The Supreme Court has quoted that some of their judgments are to suit the general consciousness of the society, the mob mentality. So take the cognizance of the geography that you are working in, and do not fantasize over gender advocacy. Make it extremely pragmatic. So that was my learning. Now coming to the work of Azad. So Azad, as I mentioned, works on 3 areas: academic learnings, policy interventions, and your activism. So policy intervention, we made 2 policy interventions to the government of India, which were quoted in the parliament. One was on medical termination of pregnancy, and the second one was on paternity benefits. So around these areas, we curate a lot of initiatives, we submit a lot of research proposals, we collaborate with a lot of organizations to work on 2 specific fields: economic independence and social inclusion of genders. So that is in the broad frame of Azad, but I'm happy to have a personal dialogue with anybody who may be interested in the field.
Thank you, Pallavi, for giving us those insights into the work that your NGO, the Azad Initiative, has done so far. And with this, I would want to bring this. I know there are too many questions, and given the paucity of time, we will not be able to address all of these questions. But however, we are going to continue engaging on gender and engaging on the movement. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm sure Pallavi would also be willing to help you with any other questions that you have. Pallavi, and before I hand it over to Pallavi to make any concluding remarks. One thing that I wanted to that Pallavi and I were also discussing initially, if a lot of you are law students here, and if you want to start somewhere, why not start with having a diversity census within your own campuses? Each one of you can take up the mantle and say, yes, before even saying that there are gender issues on campus, let us understand what those gender issues are. Let us get the data on that, so that when we go to the administration and ask them to make certain policies, we have strong data to back our arguments. So the first thing, NUJS and even NLS has conducted this amazing gender diversity census, and you can maybe take inspiration from that and conduct your own diversity census within your own campuses. Thank you, and over to you, Pallavi.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for being so patient for 1 hour listening to Mustafa and I talking about it and sharing your really coveted views about gender. And it really, really inspires me that even at the law school level, you're so interested to take up gender advocacy. And trust me, it is not just a pro bono activity. You can make money out of it, because I absolutely believe that lawyers, which people might regard as a profession, we don't do charity. So money and benefit are extremely important. And just go all out there. You will get a lot of support. You can bank upon Law Octopus to really train you. You can rant to them. You can look out to Mustafa, keep holding his LinkedIn. I'm sure he will not mind it. And thank you, Tanuj and Mustafa, for arranging this. Had a wonderful experience interacting with you and the audience.
Thank you so much, Pallavi, for agreeing to do this. It was indeed a very insightful session, some great learnings that I'm walking away with. And thank you all the attendees for tuning in. And we hope all of you have also learned enough and gained from this session. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you, Tanuj, who's also here. And thank you.